If Muhammad were around today, I think he would probably destroy every single slam poetry contest in the country.
Knowledge is power.
I'm getting handsome now, aren't I?
As I get older, they stay the same age.
I'm in heaven.
I don't want to fly. Where did you come from?
Be quiet.
That's impossible!
The Quran! We finally made it here, ladies and gentlemen. I am finally embarking on this journey, this book review and analysis of probably the second most influential book in human history. Probably the Bible being the most influential book in human history. You know, I come from a Christian background, and you know, in fact, I did like a whole Bible book review and analysis series on this channel that you can watch if you want to. But from doing that series, you know, I was just like, well, I want to do this for the Quran. I want to do this for all the religious books I can get my hands on, because going through the Bible was fascinating and, you know, transformative, and I bet going through the Quran is going to be the same way. And so, you know, I hope to do, I don't know how many videos over the Quran, but I hope to cover, you know, just about all the things in the Quran that I think are worth covering in this series. So this is exciting, ladies and gentlemen. This particular video is going to be talking about the first two chapters of the Quran, or surahs is what I think they're technically called in Arabic, but I can't speak Arabic nor pronounce it, so I'm just going to say chapters. The first chapter is called The Opening. It has an Arabic name as well. And then the second chapter is called The Cow, and I think its Arabic name is Al-Barak or something. I'm just gonna use English in this video, okay? Forgive me. But those are the two chapters that I hope to discuss in this particular video. And so without further ado, let me tell you what I thought overall, my just general impressions before I jump into the analysis of passages and verses that I liked. Let me tell you overall how I felt about the first two chapters of the Quran. I've read a lot of books in my life, wide variety of books, but I have never, ever read anything like the Quran. I had always heard that the Quran was kind of a cryptic book to read, but I gotta be honest, I did not realize exactly what people meant until I opened it up. Because what a lot of people don't realize is, at least the first two chapters of the Quran, it's not like a narrative. And it's not like a speech. Like the Bible is very much it's a narrative. It tells a story. And no doubt there are stories told in the Quran, but the Bible is like primarily like you know what kind of format you're dealing with in the Bible. You know the Gospels are telling a narrative, a story. Even if it's a book in the Bible where it's not telling a story, like Proverbs, you still understand what that book is. You understand that it's a collection of sayings. It doesn't have a story, but you understand what's going on. With the Quran, opening it up, I'm really glad that I have this resource, the Study Quran, which was recommended to me by my world religions professor in college, because this Quran particular version has a ton of footnotes that help explain kind of what's going on. They pull from other resources like the hadiths and that sort of thing to contextualize the verses of the Quran. So if you're an unfamiliar reader, or you're a reader who just wants more insight into the meaning of the Quran, you can get that. And I'm so thankful that I got this version, because if I didn't have these footnotes, I would have no clue as to what Muhammad was talking about in the first two chapters of this book. I mean, it's, like I said, it's not a narrative, and it's not like a speech either, in that in a speech, usually there's like a clear through line, like you kind of understand where the speech is going. You don't understand all the points that are going to be made, but you understand that there is like there's typically a single train of thought. The Quran, however, it's like several different trains of thought colliding. I don't mean this in a derogatory or mean way, but I got the impression from reading just a little bit that I've read, the Quran is beautifully schizophrenic. Now that sounds negative, but what I mean is it's just like I said, there's so many different trains of thought, and there's not like there's not like transitions from different trains of thought. It's just like at one point, Muhammad will be talking about Moses, and some lesson regarding peace, and then like literally the next verse will be about fighting and war, and I'm like, wait, where was the through line here? Like, how did we go from this to this? I'm not saying that that's necessarily a bad thing, but it made reading the book, what I've read of it, very difficult to follow. And as I said, if I didn't have those footnotes, I would not have been able to follow it at all. Other things that I felt were really interesting and just fascinating regarding both the opening and the cow, the first two chapters. I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Muhammad would destroy slam poetry, because this book is so poetic. And as I understand it, Muhammad, he never wrote any of it down. He just recited it. It was like direct revelation. That was the idea. And he had some other people memorize what he was reciting, and then they wrote the Quran down. I could be wrong about that. If I'm wrong, please correct me. Yeah, the book is so beautifully written, so lyrical, and just magical. Other things that I found to be just unbelievable in this book was, I mentioned I come from a Christian background, and it was absolutely fascinating to see Muhammad's view of the Torah and how it differed from the traditional Judeo-Christian views of the Torah. And it was interesting how there were even little stories here in the Quran regarding Moses and all that I don't remember being in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Old Testament of the Bible. And so, I don't know, that was just really cool to see a whole different view. There were also certain things, there were a number of verses in these first 2 chapters that really they almost there was one particular, I'm going to go over it, but there's this one particular verse that really helped me actually think about certain problems I have with the Bible better. So there's a lot of wisdom that I got out of these first 2 chapters, a lot of just really interesting parables and just ideas. And so, overall, with these first 2 chapters in the Quran, I thought it was pretty awesome. There were some passages, no doubt, and we're going to go over them, that I found to be potentially problematic here. Passages where I'm like, you could very easily interpret that to mean, to use it as, a justification for violence and that sort of thing. And so it's not like I had no issues with what I read in these first 2 chapters. But overall, I'm a pretty big fan of the way this reading has been going so far. Now I would like to jump into the analysis and discussion portion of this video, where we will analyze and discuss the different verses and passages within these first 2 chapters of the Quran that I've found to be particularly compelling, fascinating, and problematic. First off, I would like to read and discuss the opening chapter of the Quran, since it's only 7 verses. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Praise be to God, Lord of the worlds, the compassionate, the merciful, master of the day of judgment. Thee we worship, and from thee we seek help. Guide us upon the straight path, the path of those whom thou hast blessed, not of those who incur wrath, nor of those who are astray. Whenever I first read what we just read, I immediately thought, okay, this is going to be an interesting book to read. I'm glad I'm finally doing this, because that was some epic poetic language. It was only 7 verses, but I remember, I read this and I was like, there's a lot going on in these first 7 verses, and if the rest of the book is this way, then boy oh boy, is it going to be a book. The next passage I would like to read and discuss is chapter 2, verses 8 through 16. Among mankind are those who say, we believe in God and in the last day, though they do not believe. They would deceive God and the believers, yet they deceive none but themselves, though they are unaware. In their hearts is a disease, and God has increased them in disease. Theirs is a painful punishment for having lied. And when it is said unto them, do not work corruption upon the earth, they say, we are only working righteousness. Nay, it is they who are the workers of corruption, though they are unaware. When it is said unto them, believe as the people believe, they say, shall we believe as fools believe? Nay, it is they who are the fools, though they know not. And when they meet with those who believe, they say, we believe. But when they are alone with their satans, they say, we are with you. We were only mocking. God mocks them and leaves them to wander confused in their rebellion. It is they who have purchased error at the price of guidance. Their commerce has not brought them profit, and they are not rightly guided. One thing I must point out before I discuss this is chapter 2 is almost 300 verses. I forgot to mention that. It's the longest chapter in the entirety of the Quran, and so it covers many issues. But one of the big issues that chapter 2 covers is what was just covered here, which is the issue of hypocrisy and liars, frankly. And as I understand it, this passage in particular is referring to those people who were in Medina, who were with Muhammad, and who claimed to be Muslims, but who really weren't. They were just giving lip service to the faith, while in reality they were working with disbelievers just to, gain advantage in society. And this passage is obviously a large condemnation of those kinds of people. What I find particularly interesting about this passage, though, is, I feel like there's a lot of commonality regarding the sentiment expressed here and the sentiments expressed by Jesus in the Bible regarding hypocrisy. The Pharisees would make this big show of how righteous and how believing they were, when in reality they were just serving themselves. And not really, they were just using God, using the faith as a way to gain advantage of society and, gain power. And so I feel like this passage has a lot of thematic, parallels with many of the things that are discussed in the Bible. But one of the things I really thought was very cool here was when it said, verse 14, "And when they meet those who believe, they say, 'We believe,' but when they are alone with their Satans, they say, 'We are with you. We were only mocking.' God mocks them and leaves them to wander confused in their rebellion. It is they who have purchased error at the price of guidance." And I just think that is a really good description, not just of hypocrisy in a religious context and deceit in a religious context, but broadly speaking. There are many people who lie, who present themselves as genuine, when in reality they're very disingenuous. But what this correctly points out is that those people, they think that they are so much better than everyone else. They think they've figured out the game, but in reality, in the end, they're going to lose, and lose miserably in life and in the battle between good and evil. Hypocrites, disingenuous people, deceitful people, people that just give lip service things, thinking that they have purchased freedom and security and progress, have really purchased error at the price of guidance. The next thing I would like to read and discuss is verse 26. "Truly God is not ashamed to set forth a parable of a gnat or something smaller. As for those who believe, they know it is the truth from their Lord. And as for those who disbelieve, they say, 'What did God mean by this parable?' He misleads many by it, and he guides many by it. And he misleads none but the iniquitous." Now, as I understand it, the opening of that verse where it was talking about, truly God is not ashamed to set forth a parable of a gnat or something smaller, that was in reference to the fact that some people were questioning Muhammad's teachings because they thought his parables and his what he was saying was ridiculous, because rather than using a parable of like a bird or something beautiful and majestic, Muhammad was using gnats. A lot of people were saying, well, the parable can't possibly be real if you're talking about a freaking bug. That's stupid. Muhammad was saying, look, God can use anything to tell a story. And so I thought that was cool. But the part of this that I really want to zero in on is the very last line. He misleads many by it, and he guides many by it, and he misleads none but the iniquitous. Now, I didn't really understand what iniquitous meant. I looked it up on dictionary.com, and basically it just means someone who is of poor character. They are kind of so rotten from the inside that it's who they are. It defines them. That is kind of what I understand iniquitous to mean. And I found this verse to be just fascinating in relation to actually some things in the Bible. Let me first read one of the footnotes here for this verse, and particularly this issue of those who are iniquitous, and then we will discuss further what I mean by this being really interesting to read in light of some of the things I've read in the Bible. The verse implies that the very same message can both guide and mislead, which is something rather different from simply being ignored. Being iniquitous makes the truth for the denier into something other than the truth, which is to say that one's moral quality decides, at least in part, one's level of understanding. Those who are misled and labeled the iniquitous here are generally considered to be the hypocrites. What I found to be particularly profound about that passage and what it means is one of my big issues in the Bible was the verses where it would say, "And God hardened Pharaoh's heart." And I'm like, well, seems like a violation of free will, that God is making Pharaoh closed off to the truth. I was like, this seems like Pharaoh doesn't have a choice here. That always bothered me whenever the Bible would say things like God hardens Pharaoh's heart or someone else's heart. But this here in the Quran makes me look at those verses differently. Because what it's implying is something that I think is often true. Some people who are of poor character, who have a high amount of pride, whenever they engage with the truth, whenever they are confronted by God, instead of surrendering, instead of going, oh my gosh, I was wrong, what happens is their poor quality, moral traits prevent them from accepting the truth and understanding the truth. And so whenever I look at the Bible, it's like Pharaoh was an iniquitous man. He was a corrupt man. And since he was so corrupt, when he was confronted with Moses' prophecies of destruction, of plagues and all these sorts of things, and whenever it says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, and so far Pharaoh did not let the Jews go, I almost think that it's basically saying Pharaoh's poor character, his own iniquitousness, was leading him astray. He received the truth, but the truth was too much for his pride and ego that he rejected it. And so it's not that God hardened Pharaoh's heart, it's that Pharaoh's iniquitous heart hardened in the face of God. The next verse I would like to read and discuss is verse 62. Truly those who believe, and those who are Jews, and the Christians, and the Sabians, whosoever believes in God in the last day and works righteousness shall have their reward with their Lord. No fear shall come upon them, nor shall they grieve. When I first read this passage, I was terribly confused. I was like, well, wait a minute. I always hear all these things about Islam being an incredibly exclusivist religion. But this verse seems to, at least on its face, say it seems to be very, very inclusive regarding other religions, both Christians and Jews. But I still don't know what to think about it, because reading the footnotes and the commentary from, what's really cool about this book is it gives different perspectives from different Muslim scholars on what these particular verses mean. And there were some Muslim scholars who were like, see, this is an example of, Muhammad talking about how, you can get to God from different paths as long as you affirm, the truth that Muhammad preaches, while others were saying, no. This verse is referring only to those Jews and Christians who, when confronted with Muhammad's preaching, accepted it and ceased to be Jews and Christians. I mean, it's just like, I don't know what to think of whether or not it's an inclusive verse or not. On its face, it sounds that way. It seems like a great verse that means, everybody comes together, but apparently in the Islamic community, not everyone thinks that that's the case concerning this verse. So the next passage I would like to discuss is, I'm not going to read it, it's verses 67 to 73. This is where the title of the chapter, The Cow, comes from. This is Muhammad describing a story involving Moses and the Israelites disputing over, slaughtering a cow for God. And it's a really strange story. I don't really remember it being in the first 5 books of the Old Testament. I could be wrong about that, but it's bizarre. At one point it's like they slaughter this cow, and then it seems as if, at least one of the commentators suggests that they may have taken a leg from the cow or a piece of the cow and touched a dead person with it, and then that dead person came to life. It's unclear to me, but I just thought I would bring up this passage because it is quite interesting. This next passage is verses 109 to 113. This passage is very similar to that passage we just read a moment ago regarding, Jews and Christians and, the people of the book. That's what whenever it says the people of the book in the Quran, it's referring to Jews, Christians, and Muslims, people that revere the Torah, but who disagree on exactly what's true in the Torah. It's all a very strange business here. But this passage is, again, it's a passage that seems like it might be saying something that's like very inclusive to different religions and different ideas, but also has interpretations that are not that way. So I'm going to read the passage and then we will discuss. Many of the people of the book wish to turn you back into disbelievers after your having believed, out of envy in their souls, even after the truth has become clear to them. So pardon and forbear until God comes with his command. Truly God is powerful over all things. And perform the prayer and give the alms. Whatever good you send forth for your souls, you will find it with God. Truly God sees whatever you do. And they said, none will enter the garden unless he be a Jew or a Christian. Those are their hopes. Say, bring your proof, if you are truthful. Nay, whoever submits his face to God while being virtuous shall have his reward with his Lord. No fear shall come upon him, nor shall they grieve. The Jews say, the Christians stand on nothing, and the Christians say, the Jews stand on nothing, though they recite the book. Likewise did those who know not speak words like theirs. God will judge between them on the day of resurrection, concerning that wherein they differed. So this passage is really interesting because Muhammad is basically talking about interfaith conflict between Jews, Christians, and Muslims. But Muhammad is primarily talking about the Jews and the Christians, where he says, many people of the book will say, you may not enter the garden unless you believe as we do. Muhammad is basically saying, the Jews and Christians are saying that to us, and the Jews and Christians are saying that to each other. And he ends with, and God will judge between them on the day of resurrection concerning that wherein they differed. Now, the verse that's really interesting to read about, are verses 112 and 113. I'm going to read the footnotes regarding verse 112, which verse 112, to help you remember what I read, it reads, Nay, whosoever submits his face to God while being virtuous shall have his reward with his Lord. No fear shall come upon him, nor shall they grieve. And this is what the footnotes say. Here, to submit means to be sincere, and the metaphor is powerful because the face is the noblest part of one's body. And in a sense, the most profound action in the prayer is the prostration, where one's face, the forehead, and the nose touches the ground. Although some commentators, such as Al-Tabari, understand this to mean submitting one's body and actions, which is how they understand the use of face. Others, such as Ibn Kathir, add to this and say that the twin conditions of one's actions being acceptable to God are sincerity and conformity to the Sharia, Islamic law. This latter view would exclude hypocrites because of their lack of sincerity, but would also rule out Christian monks for their lack of conformity to the Sharia. Al-Razi, in the same way, leaves out Hindus who, whatever their intentions, display in his view repugnant actions. The condition of physical conformity allows the exclusion of other religions, although the plain sense of the passage, and those like it, does not necessitate such exclusion as asserted by other authorities. See, this is another passage, and particularly another verse, where I'm just like, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know if it's like inclusive or exclusive, because it's not clear that Muslims really know. And so as a Christian, I don't know what to make of it. As a further example of this, let me reread verse 113 and read the commentary regarding it. The Jews say, the Christians stand on nothing, and the Christians say, the Jews stand on nothing, though they recite the book. Likewise did those who know not speak words like theirs. God will judge between them on the day of resurrection concerning that wherein they differed. And now for the commentary. I will say this is a rather long footnote, but I'm going to read the whole thing because I do think it's very enlightening, but it also, at the same time makes me more confused as to what Muslims are supposed to think about Jews and Christians. But anyways, regardless, it's worth reading, so now let's read it. This verse may have been revealed after a group of Jews argued with the Christian delegation from Najran. Though other commentators think that it can apply to Jews and Christians generally, and does not require them to be present before each other, or even to be contemporaries of the Prophet Muhammad. Stand on nothing could also be rendered, follow nothing. And in this sense, some commentators suggest that in the beginning of their respective religious histories, the Jews and Christians did indeed follow something true, but then differed and altered their religion. But, as others point out, this would negate the obvious intent of censure in the verse, which indicates that the Jews and Christians are wrong to make this accusation against each other. They make these claims even though they recite the book, which means that in what they espouse, they should affirm rather than deny the truths in the other religion. In the case of the Jews, the Torah speaks to the truth of Jesus, and in the case of the Christians, the gospel affirms Moses and the Torah. The people who spoke words like theirs are understood to be peoples before the Jews and Christians, or possibly the idolaters who opposed Islam. The commentator Al-Kashani notes that the Christians are veiled from the outward by their attachment to the inward, while the Jews are veiled from the inward by their attachment to the outward, and that similar problems beset certain schools of thought in Islam. The suspension of a final verdict regarding religious differences is a constant theme in the Quran. God's judgment or disclosure of the truth in matters of religious disagreement on the Day of Judgment is also mentioned in, he lists a whole bunch of verses. The Quran states that at one time mankind was but one community, and that even if all were made one community again, they did not cease to differ. In other instances, the prophets are given the mission of making clear these differences. So as you can see, a theme regarding the Quran, and it's also a theme within the Bible, is it's very open to interpretation, which explains why there are so many different ideas in Islam, some more radical, some more moderate, some more radically moderate. I mean, the Bible obviously has so many denominations and disagreements, that have caused, Jews and Christians a whole lot of trouble over the years. But I will say, just with the way the Quran is written, it seems to me that it's a little bit harder to understand what the message is in some of these passages when compared to some passages in the New Testament or even in the Old Testament. Although there are many passages in the Old Testament in particular, and in the New Testament, that are very, very cryptic and hard to make sense of. But it seems to me that there are, the character of many of the passages in the Quran, at least that I've read so far, are just inherently cryptic, and they lead to a lot of, quarrels within Islam regarding what the truth actually is. Moving on to verse 115, this is a very beautiful passage. It's a passage describing God, the Islamic perception of what God is, but it also says some things that are, again, wait, what? To God belong the east and the west. Wheresoever you turn, there is the face of God. God is all-encompassing, knowing. And they say, God has taken a child, glory be to him. Rather unto him belongs whatsoever is in the heavens and on the earth. All are devoutly obedient to him. The originator of the heavens and the earth, when he decrees a thing, he only says to it, be, and it is. Those who do not know say, why does God not speak to us, nor a sign come to us? Likewise did those who came before them speak words like theirs. Their hearts are alike. We have made the signs clear for a people who are certain. What I really like about this passage is it's basically a message that's in agreement with Jews and Christians, where it's look, all the time people say, why doesn't God speak to me? Well, I've never heard a voice. I need a sign. I need a sign. In this passage, and many passages in the Bible, they say, look, signs are all around you. Look at the trees. Look at the life in all things. Ponder the universe. It's obvious that God exists. And if you refuse to acknowledge that, then no future signs are going to get you to acknowledge that either. Because enough has already been shown to you to make it obvious what the truth is. That's what this passage is saying, and I really, really like it. The one part of this passage that's really strange is verse 116. It says, and they say, God has taken a child, glory be to him. Rather unto him belongs whatsoever is in the heavens and on the earth. All are devoutly obedient to him. When I first read that, I was like, okay, is this referring to Jesus? But then I read the footnotes, and they're like, no, that can't possibly really mean that Jesus was literally like a child, like he's presented in the New Testament. It's meaning that Jesus is like divine in the way that we're all divine, a divine son of God, in that we all come from God. I think the Muslim idea is that the ideas about Jesus being God and stuff are corruptions within the Bible. They admire Jesus in the Islamic faith, but they do not believe that he was anything more than what Moses was, at least as far as I can understand it. But it's strange. I don't know, it's just strange. God has taken a child. It is a curious thing to come across, no doubt. The next verse I really want to read and discuss in chapter 2 is verse 164. This again has to do with God being obvious through signs of nature and creation. So let's go ahead and read the verse. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, and the variation of the night and the day, and the ships that run upon the sea with what benefits mankind, and the water God sends down from the sky, whereby he revives the earth after its death, scattering all manner of beast therein, and the shifting of the winds, and the clouds subdued between the sky and the earth, are surely signs for a people who understand. I really like how it says, for a people who understand. That's repeated over and over again concerning this discussion about the signs God has already given us apart from written word. That implies that, there are some people who are willing to understand, while others are not. Now, this passage that I'm going to read here, verses 190 to 194, is a very cryptic passage that has a whole lot of interpretation surrounding it. It's about war and fighting. This is one of those passages that, is kind of problematic in my opinion, because it's kind of unclear what Muhammad is referencing. I mean, the footnotes in this book go on for like 2 pages, discussing all the different ideas about like what this passage really means. And to me, this, that's an issue, because I can see how some people will look at this passage, some Muslims who are of the more like violently inclined variety, will look at this passage and see it as a justification for violence in some way. So anyways, I'm going to read the passage, and then I will discuss further like some of the interpretations surrounding it. And fight in the way of God against those who fight against you, but do not transgress. Truly, God loves not the transgressors. And slay them wheresoever you come upon them, and expel them whence they expelled you. For strife is worse than slaying. But do not fight with them near the sacred mosque, until they fight with you there. But if they fight you, then slay them. Such is the recompense of the disbelievers. But if they desist, then truly God is forgiving, merciful. And fight them until there is no strife, and religion is for God. But if they desist, then there is no enmity save against the wrongdoers. The sacred month for the sacred month, and retribution for forbidden things. So whoever transgresses against you, transgress against him in like manner as he transgressed against you. And reverence God, and know that God is with the reverent. Reading some of the footnotes, some make the argument that this passage is referring to some historical event, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah or whatever. It's some like weird like conflict type thing. Some people say that this passage really only applies to that. It's not really a message regarding the whole of fighting in Islam. It's not recommending violence except under certain circumstances, and I can see that in some ways, because it does say, if they desist, then there is no enmity against them. But then there are some people that look at this passage and they go, no, when it says desist, what it really means is if disbelievers or people who attack us, idolaters, say no to their idolatry and become believers in Islam, then we can stop fighting them. Then we can be at peace. And that is a thing where it's like, well, that's justifying, the convert or die attitude. And as I understand it, it says in a different footnote regarding a different passage somewhere in this chapter that Muhammad actually lived that out at one point, where he actually did force, disbelievers and idolaters to basically convert or die. And some people say, well, in light of that historical thing happening, that's what this passage really means when it says desist. Convert or you're in trouble. I don't know what this means, but what I do know is that since it is a passage that so many people don't really know they don't fully understand what it means, that leads to a situation where you can have people look at this passage and go, there's my justification for being a bad person. I get to enforce violence. Yes, I found God's word for that. I need to look into like the history surrounding Muhammad's life, because if he did really live out that convert or die attitude, then perhaps those radical Muslims are not wrong in their interpretation of what Muhammad was saying. So I don't know. It's a passage that, if anybody online has an opinion about and who knows more about this than even the scholars in this book know about it, then please leave whatever explanation you have for this passage in the comment section below. Now, these next two verses are they're right next to each other. It's literally one after the other. This is a great example of what I mean by this book being beautifully schizophrenic, where it's just like, it'll say something, and then the next thing it says is on a totally different train of thought. And so I'll just read verse 215. They ask thee what they should spend. Say, let whatever of your wealth you spend be for parents, kinsfolk, orphans, the indigent, and the traveler. Whatever good you do, truly God knows it. To me, that seems like a really beautiful message, a really great verse there. But that juxtaposed to verse 216 is it's bizarre. So let's just read verse 216 now. Fighting has been prescribed for you, though it is hateful to you. But it may be that you hate a thing, though it be good for you. And it may be that you love a thing, though it be evil for you. God knows, and you know not. I mean, what? Now this next passage I really was very impressed by. This is verses 230 to 233. And this is just a short passage from Muhammad's basically monologue concerning divorce. And one of the things that I have difficulties with in the Bible, in the New Testament and the Old Testament, is talk around divorce is very vague. Like there's very few details. Like there's like one verse it appears in a couple of the Gospels, at least the sentiment appears, where it suggests like the only reason for divorce would be if someone is unfaithful. But I always look at that verse and I go, well, wait a minute. What if a husband is beating the crap out of his wife and she's living in hell? Like, do you not think that she should be allowed to get divorced even though the Bible doesn't say that? It's weird. I don't like how there's such a lack of description. And so I found this particular passage that I'm going to read here very refreshing, in that the Quran really goes into pretty good detail regarding the customs surrounding divorce. One thing I should clarify on before I read this passage, though, is that it talks about things like terms, like after a woman has fulfilled her term. It's like a period of time where she's away. It's like a custom regarding divorce, and also just separation in marriage. Like if there's a husband and a wife who don't like each other anymore, a woman can leave her husband for a while. Still has to be like faithful to him, but she can be away from him for a certain number of months, like a term. And that's what it means when it says term. It means like a time period. And I also think it somewhat refers to like menstrual cycles. Could be getting a little confused here, but I'm just going to read the passage now, but just keep some of those things in mind as I read. Should he then divorce her, she is no longer lawful for him until she marries a husband other than him. And should he divorce her, there is no blame upon the two to return to each other if they deem that they shall uphold the limits set by God. These are the limits set by God, which he makes clear to a people who know. And when you have divorced women and they have fulfilled their term, keep them honorably or release them honorably, and do not keep them so as to cause harm and thus transgress. Whosoever does that surely wrongs himself. And do not take God's signs in mockery, and remember God's blessing upon you, and what he sent down to you of the book and wisdom, exhorting you thereby. And reverence God, and know that God is knower of all things. And when you have divorced women, and they have fulfilled their term, do not hinder them from marrying their husbands, when they have consented to each other honorably. Therewith are counseled those among you who believe in God and the last day. That is more virtuous and purer for you. God knows, and you know not. And let mothers nurse their children 2 full years, for such as desire to complete the suckling. It falls on the father to provide for them and clothe them honorably. No soul is tasked beyond its capacity. Let no mother be harmed on account of her child, nor father on account of his child. And the like shall fall upon the heir. If the couple desire to wean, by their mutual consent and consultation, there is no blame upon them. And if you wish to have your children wet-nursed, there is no blame upon you if you pay honorably that which you give. and reverence God, and know that God sees whatsoever you do. Again, that's just a taste, but overall, I think that's pretty good, and I'm really happy to see a bit more structure regarding the technicalities of divorce here in the Quran when compared to, certain portions of the Bible. Now this next verse here, this is verse 260, deals with Abraham, and it describes a story that I don't recall being in the Bible regarding Abraham, but it's a cool story nonetheless. And I just like to read it because I'm like, wow, that is, yeah. And when Abraham said, "My Lord, show me how thou givest life to the dead," he said, "Dost thou not believe?" He said, "Yea, indeed, but so that my heart may be at peace." He said, "Take 4 birds and make them be drawn to thee. Then place a piece of them on every mountain. Then call them. They will come to thee in haste. And know that God is mighty, wise." Tried to do some voices there so that you could figure out who was talking, because it's kind of unclear given the way it's written. But what a cool story. Abraham's like, "God, show me how you raise the dead." And God's like, "What, do you not believe that I can do it?" And Abraham's like, "No, I do believe it. I just want to see you do some cool stuff right here." And so God's like, "Gather 4 birds and place a piece of them on every mountain." So I guess like 4 dead birds, put them on different mountains, and then call them. And then the 4 dead birds are now alive and they come to Abraham. That's the idea of this little parable, this little story, rather. Super cool, in my opinion. Now, this next passage is one of my favorite passages that I have come across so far in the Quran. This is the passage between the verses 263 to 265. It's a enough said kind of passage. It speaks for itself, so I'm not going to give any commentary after it. I'm just going to read it, and I hope that you digest it. "An honorable word and forgiveness are better than an act of charity followed by injury, and God is self-sufficient, clement. O you who believe, do not annul your acts of charity through preening and injury, like he who spends his wealth to be seen of men and believes not in God and the last day. His parable is that of a smooth rock with dust upon it. A downpour strikes it and leaves it barren. They have no power over anything of what they earned, and God guides not the disbelieving people. And the parable of those who spend their wealth seeking God's good pleasure, and out of a confirmation in their souls, is that of a garden upon a hill. A downpour strikes it, and brings forth its fruit 2-fold. And if a downpour strikes it not, then a soft rain, and God sees whatsoever you do." In addition to that beautiful passage I just read, verse 271 is also beautiful, and it also has to do with charity. And I feel like this teaching is very reminiscent of what Jesus preached in the New Testament regarding charity and how you should conduct yourself in acts of service to others. You shouldn't draw attention to yourself. Rather, what you should do is do the right thing and actually try and be secretive about it. Actively try to not bring attention to your good deeds. Let your good deeds speak for themselves, and remove your ego and, your desire to be liked and admired by others at the door. "If you disclose your acts of charity, that is well. But if you hide them and give to the poor, that is better for you, and will acquit you of some of your evil deeds. And God is aware of whatsoever you do." Anyways, though, ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for this part 1 of my Quran book review and analysis series. Whether you're a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, an atheist, whatever you are, from whatever background you may be from, if you found this video interesting, or you have questions or comments you might have regarding some of the material I went over in this video, please leave whatever comments and questions you might have in the comment section below. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, if you like this video, please like it and subscribe. Tell your friends about the channel. And never forget to